Good afternoon. Good morning. It's afternoon for Greek time, I think. And to Marco Kalimera. This is all to do with my experience with Greek, actually. So I'll try and explain it as we go along. I'm going to talk about something called Noodle. The word Noodle is a tribute to John Daintree. He used to regularly come into the office on Monday morning when I was still working, and he'd say, "Pete, I've been noodling with something over the weekend. I'd like you to look at it." So the word noodle has got some rather interesting connotations for me. It means fiddling around, playing. My Noodle is, it's a bit of a long description. It is object-oriented, and it is a GUI framework for writing, for using with Dyalog. Many, many moons ago, I wrote a PocketAPL application called Filos. Filos is the Greek word for friend. So this was my little Greek friend. I was trying to learn Greek, but being a programmer, rather than actually take the bull by the horns and learn Greek, I decided to write a program and teach the program Greek instead. But I also did it to test PocketAPL, and it was a fairly sizable application. I can't remember, thousands of functions anyway. Greek is a complex language. At some point, I decided to port it to Dyalog APL. I think it was the point when my compact iPack little box, I either dropped it or it stopped working anyway, so I had to do something. I decided to port the application to Dyalog using modern Dyalog features. I used object-oriented features. I decided to use the HTML renderer because at that time I knew that I'd be able to run the HTML renderer on the Raspberry Pi, which I still can't do. That was another, but that was the reason I chose it. And I've been fooling around with this for the last 5 to 10 years, noodling around with it. At some point I showed it to Morton. His reaction was, yeah. So that kind of riled me. So I went back to him about it a bit later and showed him again, and he said, Anyway, what I finally ended up with is what I think is a viable platform for developing a desktop GUI for Dyalog APL. It isn't a web server. Just because it uses the HTML renderer, it's got nothing to do with web serving, and people find that odd. I've got 2 versions of the software at the moment. The first one is the one I developed for my own use, and I only developed this in order to port my application. I didn't develop it in order to produce some framework that I could promote to people. I just did it for my own use. And I needed to use HTML controls, like input controls and buttons and so forth. And at some point I decided it'd be nice to use jQuery widgets. So I implemented covers for the basic jQuery widgets. I showed this to Morton again, and he said, "I bet you can't tackle a proper commercial jQuery widget library." So I've had to go at doing that over the last 6 months or so. And I chose to use a thing called the jQWidget library. It's a commercial library. It's not necessarily the best one. It might not even be a good one. I really don't know. I didn't have the time to do the research. But I chose it partly because I was able to automate the transfer of the code from the jQuery widget help system into my workspace and then develop stuff for it. And you might be interested in looking at this. The structure that I have at the moment is just a workspace. It contains the code to drive the Noodle Framework. It contains a Noodle class, which has subclasses within it, each of which represents an HTML control or a widget. And the workspace contains one or more Noodle application classes, each of which has subclasses. The whole point of this is it is object-oriented. I chose to do that because the application, it's basically a dictionary, but it does a lot more than just be a dictionary. But it deals with words, it deals with verbs, it deals with nouns, it deals with adjectives. These are all classes of words. So there is a natural object-oriented structure that I was trying to implement. And also, I had to teach myself JavaScript along the way, but it's not a fundamental, major part of the application. You need some JavaScript to support it, but it's not a vast amount. So a Noodle application, I'm just going to show you in a moment, is a class which is based on the Noodle class. It has to contain certain public fields. One of them is called content, and there are others. And it has to contain a constructor that creates the content. Before I carry on, can I ask how many people here, can I have a show of hands, how many people have used the object-oriented features? How many people write Dyalog classes? Wow, that's quite impressive. How many people use nested classes? How many people have any difficulties with nested classes? I had terrible difficulties with nested classes, but I eventually found a way around them, the problems. Anyway, right. Let's start APL up. So I have a workspace called Glasgow. Oops. I must apologize for my typing. I'm really struggling with this keyboard. And in it I've got some some classes. You see there's one class called Noodle, and all the other ones are classes based on Noodle. So here's a very simple Hello World class. It contains, in this case, a field called active, and I'm going to show you how that works in a moment, and a constructor function, build content, which creates the content of the graphical user interface. The first statement, line 3, creates a grid container. Now, grid container is fundamental to the whole structure of this system. When I started writing it, I wrote CSS. And if you've ever tried to write CSS, it's not easy. I had files containing 200, 300, 400 lines of CSS code just to display a few things on the screen. I was using the CSS grid, which is one of the recommended ways of doing it these days. And at some point, I thought, hang on, I could automate this thing in APL. So I did, and I've created a thing called a grid container, which basically implements all of the functionality of the CSS grid. But you don't have to know how it works. You don't know anything about it. And this, just delete that, change that to 1. You can see the line which creates the content. It creates a new, an instance of the grid container class. And then within that, I run a function add item to add a label, which has got the caption on it, hello world. If I fix that function, it displays the GUI, which is fair enough. If I were to replicate this line a few times and fix the function again, then it reproduces what my function, my definition of the class contains. And you can see that it's laid it out as best it can. If I create a field My typing is bad at the best of times, but when I'm nervous, it's even worse. And fix that, then that just increases the size of the window allocated to the HTML renderer. If we now take another couple of these lines, stick them in. If I put a 1 in the front of the, as a left argument to the add item function, it tells it to start the, I've put it in the wrong one, doesn't matter, do it again. It tells the grid container to start that, to add that item at the beginning of the next row. And there's a whole bunch of other ways of controlling the system, not just using the left argument to the add item function, but also using properties of the grid container itself, which allows you to align things as you want. And there's still more development that can be done on it, but basically I've found I can do anything, any kind of layout for an HTML page, or for a GUI. Let's call this a GUI, not an HTML page. I found I can do anything I want with this structure. It's very simple to use. Okay, this example is not 11. This has just got a label and a JQ button. Now, JQ means it's a jQuery widget. So this is an implementation of the jQuery button. And if I click the button, I get an error message in the session which says that I haven't defined a callback function for it. It's expecting a callback function called jQClick. This is not fundamental, but it shows you my approach to this. Everything's in the workspace. There is no state indicator. It's very just easy. It's like using a simple APL session. This one's now got a callback function in it. So if I run this and click the button, good Lord, nothing happens. Just what we want. The way the system works is there's a callback function. All callback functions are called with a right argument, which I've conventionally called command. It represents the command that the user is giving to the program. I want you to do this. I click the button, I want you to do something. And it's a namespace. The way the program responds, your application responds to this, is that the callback function returns another namespace, which I call response, which tells the user interface what to do next. If you say you want to do nothing, response.cmd is empty. It does nothing. If I say close, refix the function, and click the button, it closes it. So it's really very straightforward way of, and this structure, callback function, which takes a right argument, which contains the information, what the user wants to do, if you like the event, but it's more than that. And the the response to it, the result is a response, what to do next. And the way you write an application is you just write lots of callback functions with this structure and just feed them, just run them together. You get the interaction between the user and the application. Now, this version is a little bit more sophisticated. First of all, I've used a jQuery theme. So it's got a field public theme gets eggplant. So this is using the jQuery eggplant theme. So the appearance of the GUI is somewhat different. Is that what I've got left? I'm only 5% through. That's going to be tricky. If I put something in here and press the button, you can see echoed in the session is the value of certain things. Now, I have to take you through this. When I add an input control by the argument for the constructor is by default its ID. And in my system, when you get a response from the GUI, the value of all of the controls are represented by variables in a namespace whose name is the ID of the control. So in this case, I've got a control called data, and here I'm displaying the value of data I'm displaying all of the contents of the command namespace. The CMD, or the command, is jQSubmit. That's what the user wants to do. He wants to press the submit button. And the ID is the ID of the button that was pressed. And you can see, if I write end here and press the button, the logic says if the contents of that button, quad select quad C command.data, is close, end, or stop, it closes. Now I think I'll just show you this one before I just explain how it works. Anyone who's read a Dyalog GUI manual will find somewhere in it there's an example of a temperature converter. I wrote that in 1980 something, I don't know. So this is another temperature converter. It's just a bunch of numeric fields which convert Fahrenheit to centigrade. Now, if I take you through the code quickly, you can see that here we have an input control, which is type number, and it's got a thing called bound field. And what bound field does is it ties the value of that's in the control to the value of the field that's in the APL instance of that class. So I've got up here a public field, Fahrenheit is 32, public centigrade is 0. So it's mapping the contents of the GUI to fields in the instance of the class. The mechanism for how this works is, I haven't got time to explain. Now, I don't have to execute classes through the editor. I can just use the function run, which is exactly, that's all it's doing, is the same thing. So if I run demo 5, this is a much more complicated example. Here I've got a temperature converter which converts from Fahrenheit to centigrade or centigrade to Fahrenheit, and I've got a slider version of that which does the same thing using jQWidget. If I want to create another converter, I could call this distance. I'm not going to fix the typos. That's not going to work. That might. No, it won't. Wrong field. Oh, whoops. Oh, yeah. This is, what I'm showing you here is a JQ Dyalog widget, which is a window that appears on the screen into which you can put whatever you want, but it operates by default in a modal way, so that the rest of the application is not accessible by the user. And if I click OK, you get an idea of what that's doing. So I've added this. another one of these. Now, basically, what I've got under here, I really don't have time to show you now because I'm running out of time quickly, is this is a way of creating instances of classes which themselves are based on subclasses, so that in the workspace, I very quickly I have the main class here. I have a class called dual_conv, which is the version with the input controls on it, and I've got a version with slider controls, which are based on dual, which contains the meat, the workings of the thing. Dual_conv and dual_slider are just different GUI ways of displaying the same information. And what I'm doing is creating as many instances as I want of these classes, which is the point about it. Oh my God, this is all... This is the example this is the port of my application. And I'm really a bit embarrassed about this because when I put it up, if I type a word like run, it gives me all of the English words it knows which begin with run, and then it displays all of the Greek words which match run. Now when a few days ago I was running through this and I noticed that some of these Greeks, some of these are wrong. And I thought, that's not going to matter, no one's going to notice. Marco, I don't know if you can see, but they're wrong. And if I wanted to create a noun, actually I've got an adjective because I typed the wrong bloody thing in. You can see that we've got here instances of the classes, the verbs and the noun classes, and I can have as many of these as I want in the application. I'm going to have to skip the next part, but I was going to show you how I create new ones and the way the interface works. Suffice it to say that the jQWidget, the jQWidgets are quite rich in the way they work, so that they're much better than the ordinary edit controls and so on that we're used to using. Just going to put this back to what it was. And I'm logging off for a reason. I'm going back in again for a reason. Damn destructors. Right. This has a Noodle class. This is the basic Noodle class that we have, that I have, which contains, Pete, get hang on. Which contains a bunch of subclasses. And you can see there's a small number of jQWidgets in here and HTML controls. If I run a function, what that's done is it's read all of the help file information from the jQWidget library and constructed a Noodle class which now contains 25,000 lines and 70-odd subclasses. If I run jQXDemo, this contains a number of demonstration classes for this. Now, I've run out of time, so I'm going to have to whiz through this. So there's a naught. Okay, I will whiz through it really fast. These are using not the jQuery widgets, but the the commercial set. So I've got button groups, I've got inputs here. If I wanted to type something like choose an adjective, you can see it's auto-completing. I've got an editor widget. I've got a whole bunch of calendar widgets which do all sorts of different things. Menus, which I think are quite nice. We've got some bar gauges. We've got another bar gauge. I don't know what this one's doing. This is one that you control with a slider. And then we've got a really good temperature converter which does this. Okay, so what I'm really saying is you've got not just the basic controls that you get with HTML and you get with jQuery, but if you use a commercial library, you can also get access to all sorts of fancy stuff. Right, I think I'm done.